Hey, Brian from the Hot Boy Summer Brian here. And yeah, Hot Boy Summer is over, and boy did I not do anything.
I did nothing at all.
And by that I mean I watched some movies. Too many to review on a weekly schedule, so here I go from worst to best. Let's go, let's start. The worst one was Woman in the Window. This is yet another embarrassing Amy Adams vehicle, although her performance was better than it was in Hillbilly Elegy. This movie is really up its own ass about ripping off Hitchcock's Rear Window. It tries throwing in suggestions that other characters might be manipulating Amy Adams or gaslighting her, but it's all just incredibly boring. Every attempt at being stylish or interesting fell flat on its face, especially when the editing tried to pull its weight. Many of the film's post-production effects were so cheesy and unprofessional looking, it completely ruined the tone the film was going for. Despite the many talented actors and Danny Elfman writing the music, the only notable part of the movie was the climax, because that's when it became kinda funny. Imagine you were watching The Room, but after they find Tommy Wiseau's dead body, Denny just started stabbing people. It was a thorough, plotting, self-important waste of time, and I'm giving Woman in the Window a 3 out of 10. Next was Spiral from the Book of Saw. I feel like I've said this 30 times this year, but recent franchise films seem intent on not giving us the things people like the property for, and this is another case of that. I think they were trying to go back to their roots. Like, the first Saw is clearly inspired by the film Seven, and Spiral seems to be even more so. Its look and emphasis on police procedural plot points are indicative of this. It's so bad at it, though. Think of the most generic cop movie scene in history, the one where the commissioner grills the protag for being a loose cannon, assigns them a new partner, to which the protag says, "I don't need a partner." That happens verbatim in this movie. If your great cop thrillers are like a nice beef stew, Spiral is like a bowl of plain chicken broth. Not even a teaspoon of salt in there, just the broth. Chris Rock wasn't awful, I guess, but it's not like he did great work here. If you're a fan of Saw, you'll be disappointed to learn this has probably the suckiest traps to date. There's only like 3 to 4 of them, and you could edit them all out and the movie would be exactly the same, which is not hyperbole. The director confirmed they would write "insert trap here" in the script and come up with whatever later. It all leads up to an incredibly telegraphed, nonsensical, and abrupt climax. This is definitely the most boring, inconsequential Saw movie in my memory, and I would not recommend it at all. It's gotta be like a 3 out of 10 for Spiral. The next film was Stowaway. This is a Netflix original about a trio of scientists on a spaceship to Mars, but discovering an unforeseen passenger creates a trolley problem, as the ship is meant to only recycle 3 people's worth of oxygen. The film does very little to invest you in any of these scientists. The titular Stowaway is a likable character, thankfully, as the movie does not work if he's not, but the plot is so simple and does nothing to deviate from that simplicity. It only piles on more and more melodrama, and seeing if that works. Hey, we know Anna Kendrick said she doesn't want to sacrifice the guy for them to survive, but how about we include another scene where she says she doesn't want to sacrifice the guy for them to survive? Maybe that'll make the audience more involved in the story. The ending is stupid and abrupt. It also kind of ruins the mission they're on. I guess it wasn't unwatchable or anything, but at the end of the day, I just didn't care. I give Stowaway a 5 out of 10. Next up is Oxygen. This is a Netflix original about a woman who wakes up inside a malfunctioning cryogenic sleeping pod without any memory of why she's there, and has to use the tools at her disposal to find out how to save herself before she runs out of oxygen. And if you're thinking, that sounds like Stowaway, I thought so too. Is it a coincidence that Netflix setting their tentpole movies on a claustrophobic spacecraft means you don't have to build many sets or hire many actors? Besides a few effect shots, how expensive is it really to make these new films? I just thought they'd space out their minimalist filler content instead of releasing 2 very similar ones like a month apart. If you have to see one, see Oxygen, I guess. Melanie Laurent's performance is appropriately sympathetic and stressed out. However, the science fiction elements of the film sometimes seem kind of rushed. Like, there's a massive amount of control people have from inside these cryopods, even though they're supposed to be asleep the whole time. What purpose would there be to let the person inside access all of this stuff, including the internet, if they're supposed to be unconscious? There's a big reveal towards the end of the film, after which Oxygen started to lose me. The character motivations just didn't connect with me anymore. Watch it for yourself, I guess, if you want to see if your reaction is anything different, and I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. Next is The Mitchells vs. the Machines. The word of mouth behind this film is extremely positive. People think this is a real breath of fresh air. It tries being more off-kilter and quirky than most animated movies do, and when it succeeds at this, it's usually through the radical editing, cinematography, and parts of the dialogue. I say parts because although this movie is clearly spoofing the information age parent-child generation gap, it only seems to understand one half of that perspective. As time passes, we have to realize old millennials are going to start making movies, and with them is going to come their own version of phone bad boomer humor. Except this time, it's presented by people who've seen lol random Invader Zim shit. The internet humor seems really out of date. Like Neon Cat and Numa Numa references. Really? Did this come out a decade ago? I also really hate pugs, so the parts where the joke is there is a pug on the screen didn't land at all. A lot of jokes were tired and obvious and broke the film's momentum. It's also trying to have this message about technology bringing families together in the long run, but also juxtaposes this with jokes about tech monopolies and data stealing, and I can't help but think one of these things sounds vastly more important than the other. Olivia Colman was a bright spot, but the other voice acting wasn't that great. I guess if there's one thing I love about this film and wish more did correctly, it's in the protagonist. The main character is clearly queer, but the filmmakers had her indulge in more elements of young queer culture to tell you this rather than directly through a love interest. I don't know, it felt like a great example of not tokenizing a canonically gay character, and I wish more movies followed this example. Besides that though, I wasn't that keen on Mitchells vs. the Machines. I guess some parts were kind of fun, but on the whole, I cringed way too many times at the film's sense of humor to ever want to watch it again. I'm thinking a 5 out of 10 for this. Next up is No Sudden Move, the new Steven Soderbergh film. This is an old-school crime thriller taking place during the 1970s. It boasts entertaining performances by Don Cheadle, David Harbour, and Kieran Culkin. Bill Duke, I'm pretty sure, was put on the planet to play his character in this. This is a film that indulges in the sheer number of characters and subplots going on, and while that's really charming at first, after a while the story gets a little convoluted, and also a worse version of The Nice Guys. Like, by the end, the plot is really similar. There's some weird lensing going on. The fisheye, or whatever lens they used, was so wide that if a character was standing at the edge of the frame, they looked like banana people. It wasn't a huge deal or anything, just something I noticed. Not much else to say about this. I was at least engaged throughout the whole thing, and if it sounds like something you'd like, I'd recommend checking it out if you have HBO Max. 6 out of 10. Next up is Shiva Baby. This is a first-time feature by director Emma Seligman. It is a fairly tense, dark comedy about a college student attending a Shiva ceremony when a guest she did not anticipate being there shows up. The comedy is based largely on a mix of situation, one-liners, and social convention, and for this reason it kind of felt like an elongated Seinfeld episode. Like, I could totally see a college-aged Elaine Bennis going through this exact same scenario. And no, I'm not saying that because everybody in the movie is Jewish. Have a little class, please. The supporting cast was great. The film is appropriately claustrophobic. Some of the dialogue was a little overly trendy or forced, but for the most part was pretty solid. If there was a problem for me, the score seemed to shamelessly rip off Hereditary, which was really distracting because on its own that style of musical score is used for horror. It could certainly be argued this is a horror movie in some ways, but its heart seems set on comedy, and if the two genres are meant to simultaneously occupy the film, they are really isolated from one another and fighting for room. But Shiva Baby is still a pretty good foot forward for this director, and I look forward to what she makes next. I think this is a 6 out of 10. But the best movie I saw this summer was Pig! This film sees Nicolas Cage as a truffle hunter when his prized pig is taken from him. And that sounds like the setup for a purposefully tongue-in-cheek John Wick ripoff where, haha, it's human meme Nicolas Cage trying to get his pig back. Wholesome 100 Keanu Big Chungus. What do you mean Invincible was actually kind of cringy? Trust me, the last thing I need is Polar, but with Nick Cage. That's not what Pig is. Of course, I'm not going to spoil it, but when the film is ever self-aware, it's in how it gently teases becoming a movie like that. While it never indulges in any real action scenes, many situations and visual tricks are reminiscent of your classic film bro fare, but intentionally doesn't follow through on them. The presentation in this movie is beautiful, but very muted, very gray. There's a familiar surface tension of old school grit hiding emotional depth instead of frat bro violence. This is a much more pensive, slow look at the themes that motivate revenge movies. While it kicks off with little to no setup, the emphasis on what exactly has been taken away from Cage steadily grows into something far beyond the standard, basic physical or tangentially emotional loss that may catalyze a film like this. I liked how there were so many things in this film that threaten our characters that cannot be killed with a headshot, and it revels in that fact without becoming droll. Nick Cage is actually taking the script seriously and does great work here. He's definitely unhinged, but not in the quirky, social media ruined definition of the word. Like, there is a deep frustration to his character that sets him apart from everyone else in an off-putting way. The film deals with his journey of loss and grief, but also how difficult it is to reconcile those things. Every principal character has something they're struggling to accept, and by the end, still have to work towards accepting whatever that happens to be for them. Although you could say it's unsatisfying to watch a film unfold this way, I think the deliberation behind that is not laziness, and instead becomes a wholly developed message in itself. The restraint this film chooses to show repeatedly impressed me. The emotions behind Pig feel real, and is built around them from start to finish. Thank you. It's slow-paced, but does not hide behind that to trick you into thinking it's smart. Much of the film is precise that you have all the information you need to make connections when dramatically viable. I'd be pleased to see this director's future work, as well as happy I didn't have to wait like another 10 years after Mandy for Cage to choose a good project again. I'm thinking a 7 out of 10 for Pig. And that's it. That's every movie I saw this summer. So did you like these films more than me? Less than me? Well, if you care to, please tell me. And as always, if you like not only words, but the way I arrange and then say them, please consider giving this video a like. It helps with the algorithm. And then subscribing to me, Brian from the channel Brian. Thank you, and goodbye.